Hey guys, it's Ryan here from, whoops, shaking the camera. Hey, it's Ryan here from All Mine Ranch, and You Sure Talk a Lot. I think this is a You Sure Talk a Lot video. Didn't really think this one out. This is an off-the-cuff one, and I don't always speak intelligently on topics, just off the cuff. But the sun is setting. There's been a new moon. Maybe that was 2 nights ago or something like that. And I find the topic of astrology very interesting. I'm not an expert on it. I've never studied it, and a lot of the terminology with astrology, you know, conjunction and in the house of, and, you know, things like that. I don't know what those mean. I did finally learn what retrograde means, and to me it means nothing. It's a normal movement of a orbiting body, but because of where it's at in its orbit, from our perspective on Earth, it appears to go backwards in the sky, but it's still following its normal path. So you hear about Mercury retrograde. Does it actually mean anything? Well, yes and no. And on many topics, sorry, I got to wear my sunglasses until the sun goes behind the mountain, which it is mostly half behind the mountain. It's about to be completely behind it, and then I can take them off. But I have a few friends who are atheists, or maybe a better term is skeptics. They just really like to apply their, and for me it's set. For me, the sun sets about 20 minutes, 15 minutes before it does for people in slightly different locations because of the mountain that is blocking the horizon. So anyway, it's not sunset officially, but for me, the sun just went behind the mountain. I'm no longer blinded. But anyway, so since I have friends who are skeptics, I often think about how I would explain certain concepts to someone who's skeptical, especially woo-woo, new agey, spirituality type concepts. And to me, it's as simple as this. Astrology is as simple as this. Everything in the whole universe has significance, meaning, and hidden meaning, meaning it conveys information in a subtle way that you may or may not pick up on. And that applies to literally everything. But when you start thinking about the sun, the moon, the planets, other bodies in the in the solar system and other solar systems and other galaxies, all that, they have a physical expression. And everything that has a physical expression has significance, meaning the realm of the non-physical, metaphysical realm that I tend to think of as more significant within the physical, which is should probably think of them equally weighted. But they have significance spiritually, and there's a physical manifestation component. And you can't just look at the one or the other. And people realize that's true about other things they may deem significant, like angels or ghosts or God or Jesus, where they don't ascribe that same significance to celestial bodies like the moon. Like if you start asking yourself about the moon, why is it where it is? And why does it look the way it does? And why does it, cause and help facilitate solar eclipses so perfectly? Which, by the way, tens of thousands or millions of years in the future, that won't be true. Because of the expansion of the universe, the moon will be further from the Earth, and so will the sun, and they won't line up perfectly to create that perfect disc-on-disc effect. So I just learned that recently. That's kind of cool. But why is the moon where it's at right now? And what is the purpose of the moon? Because face it, if there is a God, and I'm not saying there is, actually I am, but I'm not going to argue it in this video. If there is a God, then God's responsible for the moon. Well, what's the significance of the moon's composition, its placement, its effect on us with the tides, with, giving rise to human expression of music and love and beauty? The moon, obviously is a powerful force on humanity in that it gives inspiration to so many poets and artists and lovers and, werewolves. So the moon has significance even if there's no God. And you could say it has a metaphysical, spiritual, sort of supernatural effect on humanity even if there's no God. right? So, okay, let's apply that to the sun now. The sun, the fact that it's just this ball of radiating energy that gives us life force. And I actually also recently found out a really cool fact. And by the way, there's mosquitoes coming out. It's witching hours. So if you see me looking around and scratching, that's why. I need to sit cross-legged to protect my feet. I put on lightweight pants. By the way, it's cooler fall weather tonight. I love it. I didn't have to run the AC today. I got up to about 89 degrees. It was a little uncomfortable during the peak of the day, but man, once that sun started to get a little lower, it's now down to about 80. It just feels gorgeous out here, and it's calm and still and peaceful except for me running my mouth. Anyway, going back to the sun, I realized it takes almost 1,000 human years for a photon to erupt from the core of the sun and just make it to the surface. Like, it bounces around so much. It's actually kind of a rare thing, or a interesting thing, when a photon actually breaks out of the surface of the sun and radiates across the universe. And if it radiates in our direction, eventually, after a period of time, if that photon can end up ending its lifespan inside your eyeball. So isn't that a cool thing to think about? This isn't what I had intended to talk about, but imagine that every photon, which is required for you to be able to view anything, because without photons, it's dark and you can't see shit. Every photon that enters your eyeball came from the sun, and every one of those photons at some point was in the center core of the sun and took 1,000 years to get out, and then it took a few more minutes to get here. Then how cool is it if that photon hits some other surfaces? Like when you look in the distance and you see at sunset, for me anyway, because I have neighboring houses, occasionally that sunsetting light will reflect off of the neighbor's glass windows and bounce in my direction. And sometimes in the sunrise, I look towards Sierra Vista, which is in the west, getting the rising sun from the east. It'll be hitting the windows of some $1 million houses in that area and bouncing several 10 miles maybe. Birds. Ooh, birds swooping and fighting and doing their dance. That's cool. It will bounce 10 miles more. It'll get an extra 10-mile lifespan, that photon, bouncing off the house and into my eyeball, where my body actually figures out a way to digest and actually convert a photon. So it lives on in some way. Cool freaking shit if you start looking into it. But anyway, back to astrology. So if you just think of every physical thing, whether that's, this pot right here or this bottle of water, it has some mass and gravity affects it. And if it's got, like, this has water in it and that has soil in it, right? So its properties change. But it has metaphysical properties. It's not just a thing sitting there. And think about, okay, well, if that's true, what are the metaphysical properties? Well, maybe not too mind-blowing if it's just a pot with just dirt, although the amount of life in that dirt at a microscopic level is also a mind-blower. Let's let go of that for a minute and say, well, if every physical thing, animals, birds, bottles, have metaphysical properties, what are the metaphysical properties of everything in the night sky, but particularly planets? It's not just coincidence that our days of the week in Greek gods and so much in mythology are all named after planets, Mars and Martians, and Mercury and Monday, that kind of thing. So if you think about Saturn, Uranus, and all of the other planets, Pluto I'll include in that, even though it's been delisted as a planet and then possibly relisted, there's a reason they're at the place that they're at the time that they're at it. And because they absorb the sun and the moon and have a gravity field that interacts with the gravity fields of the sun and the moon and every other planet, all the planets are doing a dance. So if you think about that dance and think about everything has both that physical and spiritual, metaphysical aspect to it, it's only natural that I can see a faint sliver of the moon, the new moon. It's maybe 1-2 days old in the sky now that the sun has set. That's cool. So there we go. There's that juxtaposition. The sun's over here, the moon's here, the sun is bouncing off the moon and hitting my eyeballs. So now that sunlight and that photon has another hop in the sunlight network off of the frickin' moon before it hits my eyeballs. How cool is that? Anyway, those planetary bodies, I think their motion, their path, their locations, and their energetic nature, and the reason that they exist in the first place beyond just random chance, that is all what astrology is. So while it can be a tool if someone chooses to study it and maybe work within its, laws or influences, that might be worth doing. In the same way that we sometimes choose to work with and learn from other, pseudo New Agey sciences like the ancient art of Feng Shui. There's something to Feng Shui. I've read many books on it. I've tried to incorporate it, and now I don't do it consciously so much, but I definitely do it subconsciously. But I really should apply the Bagua to my main house before I get going on that. I need to put some time and thought into that. I've never tried to lay a Feng Shui Bagua grid across my house in the natural layout that seems to me to be appropriate for that house. But anyway, just like Feng Shui is an art form, astrology is an art form, and both of them are rooted in the physics, the science of their location, those, at least in the case of the planetary bodies. So with all that said, is astrology real? Well, absolutely. Is it New Age bullshit? Absolutely. Because everything, this is another favorite topic of mine, everything, let me start it over. Nothing is any one thing. And you could say everything is two things. Everything is an infinite number of things. But there's two sides. Again, the physical and the non-physical meaning. So is a table just a table? Yes. But does a table have, spiritual meaning around being support and helping us and being a tool and providing stability, and the fact that we call mesas in the desert tables and tables are mesas and all of that? It's a whole nother thing. But everything is two things, the physical manifestation of it and its personal significance. I won't say universal significance, but it's personal significance. Everything in this universe has personal significance. So what is the personal significance of Mars and Venus and Neptune, right? I'm not going to try to answer that, but I'm offering that they do have significance, and the significance they have on us in the month of March versus the month of October. They behave and we respond to in infinitely subtle and unknowable ways to the locations of those bodies. Like the fact right now for me that the moon is here in the sky at a particular angle versus that angle. Does that impact me? Well, one could say, no way, dude, that has no impact, but it does impact, the gravitational effect on the water that's inside this bottle. So in a sense, it has a very small effect on me. And on the sense that it impacts the tides, if I were living anywhere near the coast, the moon would have a big physical impact on me and what my potential activities are around the tides, right? So everything that's in the sky, from planets to stars to moons and asteroids and other in-between type objects, does impact us. So astrology, even if you don't study it, just to admit, to say astrology is the study of things that impact us in both subtle and non-subtle ways, and those objects are in the sky. That's what astrology is. An astrologist might be like, holy shit, Ryan, that's heresy. You can't describe it that way. But it can be as simple as that. And then, of course, you could go deep and go deep and go deep. And, I studied the writings of Yogananda and read Autobiography of a Yogi numerous times. And it was the first book that actually went into some Vedic astrology. And his guru, Sri Yukteswar, who was a really admired man, since he died back in the early 1900s, turn of that century, was a Vedic astrologer. And a lot of his teachings and basic principles ended up in Autobiography of a Yogi. So if you haven't read that, definitely go read that book. But Vedic astrology in general is part and parcel of a lot of the philosophies I've read and agree with. And so I learned a little bit about it, but I've never studied more like Western astrology and all the terminology used there. Maybe I will someday, maybe once I'm retired. But astrology is a cool subject because Millions of people pay very close attention to it, or even if they don't, they read a daily horoscope and just go, that sounds like it could apply to anybody. But true astrology, beyond, horoscopes, is just the science of things in the sky and what their impact is on us. And they do have an impact, just like the cactus and the mountain beyond me have an impact on me. Things that are at further distances impact me. The butterfly effect says everything affects everything in subtle ways. And I'm not a big believer just saying, oh, there's gross things near me that have major impacts, and I'm only going to give attention to the thing that's, crashing me in the head, or the food I'm putting into my body, perhaps, or the substances. I want to pay attention to more subtle things like the haze of smoke from wildfires down in Mexico that's right now pink on the horizon that I can see, that is making up. In fact, now that I really shut up and look at it, there's a lot of smoke above the mountain that is tinting the sunset. And that's a very subtle thing, but if I'm present in the moment and I pay attention to it, it impacts me, brings me a little more joy. I think, wow, the horizon is more dynamic tonight because I can see exactly where down in Mexico, even though it's beyond yet another range of mountains. I can see that far tonight to say that maybe 30 miles hence there is a plume of pink smoke that is wafting into the United States right now and is probably making it all the way across the state. I'll have to look at a map and see what that's all about. But that impacts me, and it impacts you because I just told you about it. So these subtle things that come from afar that impact us sometimes are worth paying attention to. So does astrology matters. That's all I'm going to say on that. It was nice talking to you. Share your thoughts. I want to hear your take on it. Do you study astrology? Do you put any weight into it? I do a little bit. Not as much as I do feng shui, but I know it's a real thing. Real. Is some woo-woo astrology bullshit and the people who don't know what they're talking about ramble on about shit that they are not qualified to ramble on about when it comes to astrology? And should you ignore those fuckers? Yes and yes. But doesn't mean there isn't science behind the gravitational effect and the spiritual impact that planetary bodies have on us as humans. You can't deny that, right? What are your thoughts?